and good morning. Well, it's morning for me. I know it's not morning for everybody, but welcome to Coffee Chat. Today, start with your channel intro, Rachel. Sorry, I had a long weekend and it's thrown off my whole week. Welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Rachel Tapman, and my channel is for anyone who cares about language technology and other people. There, boom, channel intro. Let's hop right in. So, I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about this week. And first, okay, absolutely great. Everything is working as I anticipated. Make sure I've got the live chat so I can see everything everybody says. We've got, I'd say a medium amount to cover today. As always, we're gonna talk about research. We're gonna talk about, just like practical stuff that's relevant to language technologists. And we've also got politics, which some court cases, some legislation, some pretty big news on the legislation front, actually. Ethics, which I wouldn't say it's rambling, but there's a lot of sort of like disconnected stuff that happened this week, or that I heard about this week that I wanted to talk about. And then last but not least, fun. So we have just a couple things to, end the stream on a high note. So let's hop into research news. Oh, actually one of them I don't have in here, but a while ago I mentioned that Ian Goodfellow left Google. Now he's gone to DeepMind, which I think is owned by Google. So we're gonna be talking about DeepMind kind of a lot. Hi, Hector. Just they've come up a bit in the news recently. So starting off, we have some workshop papers from NACL. So NACL, NAACL, the North American Association for Computational Linguistics Conference. It happens every year in North America. You'll be surprised to hear. And it's one of the ACL conferences. So commonly considered a particularly good place to publish research. So first up, we have something from the Gender Bias and NLP workshop at NACL. I will say NACL proper starts this weekend, I believe. I believe it starts on the 9th or the 10th. Hi, Simulated Sultan. I'm doing okay. Hopefully y'all are too. I have a little bit of a headache. And I'm hoping that as I drink more coffee, I'll get less headache. That's usually how it works. So this paper was looking at the relationship between model size and then gender bias in the model. So I think, we talked about last week I forget what the name of the prize was. It was in the video last week, but basically it's a prize for bigger models, for tasks where bigger models do worse and smaller models do better. And one of the things where that might be something to think about is in the sort of the bias space. So the overall findings of this paper are that bigger models, when they make errors, tend to make more stereotyped errors. So that's sort of the headline from this paper. So the preprint that's linked here is on arXiv, but it has been published, and I'm pretty sure the workshop has already happened, or will happen soon. Anyway, so this is a preprint, but it's also a published paper. So it should be on the ACL anthology soon if you're interested in that. There's also a couple YouTube videos, and I'll actually pop these in the chat real quick if you want to check them out later, so this is the first one by Tal Linzen, and these are from the workshop on insights from negative results in NLP. I was on a panel at that workshop last year, and then the year before I think I gave a talk. It's a really cool workshop, and basically the idea is, if you're familiar with the file drawer effect, most research reports that get most research results that get reported, tend to be, exciting, positive results, like we tried something and it worked. Med says NACL is next week. Yeah, I think at least some of the workshops associated with the conference have already happened, though. Oh no, this one was with ACL 2022. Okay, yeah, so I think then the workshops haven't happened yet. The ACL workshops have, the NACL workshops haven't. Very unconfusing. ACL is a separate conference. Thank you for the clarification, Med. So the idea of the negative results workshop is that we should also be saying, you know, what didn't work, because otherwise people are just going to keep trying things that don't work, that other people have also tried that also didn't work, and we'll all end up wasting a lot of time and money and compute and generating a lot of carbon we didn't need to. So the first talk is by Tal Linzen, and it is sensitivity to initial weights and out of distribution generalization. So we're talking about initial weights, initialization, right? And how that affects how well a model can generalize to things it hasn't seen yet. And then the second one is, I think this is more like a career review talk, which can actually be one of my favorite types of talks, is of a senior researcher who's like, hey, here's what I've done in my career. Here's what I've thought about. You know, here's why I think what I do now, the key findings from the research, how my thinking has changed. I think that type of talk can be so helpful and informative, particularly for younger scholars. So this one is by Barbara Plank from Munich, LMU Munich, and it's on serendipity and turning failures into signal. So both should be cool talks. They haven't gotten a lot of views, but if you like my channel, you probably like that channel as well. And Anna uploads talks from workshops very occasionally, I would say. So not a high volume channel, but good content. Also at NACL next week, so this is on this Sunday, is Queer in AI. So queer meaning, you know, a very broad term referring to generally different genders, different sexual orientations, broadly, I don't know. It's a little hard to define queer. And the reason that I'm bringing up this one in particular, and later on today, we're going to also talk about voice recognition, speech recognition, and gender, because there's a really good blog post that came out by Angus Greaves-Smith, who is a speech technologist, about gender fluidity. But I've seen a lot of desire to use gender as a variable in natural language processing tasks, and a lot of sort of assumptions that it's going to be clear what gender is and how it works and what people's genders are, which is, I would say, not a great assumption to go in with. And there will be a panel at 2:30 that should be particularly, I think, helpful if that's something that you are thinking about in your work. And then, of course, the workshops associated with conferences also publish proceedings, so there's also a bunch of new research out as well. So, you know, lots of interesting tasks that I think, this one is a tasks, lots of interesting work that I think is of, you know, just general interest, particularly given, I would say, the current political climate, and the ways in which algorithmic and tools and language technology in particular can be used as a tool of oppression, and how we can, you know, anticipate and avoid that as technologists. So, good workshop, been good in the past. If you want to tune into the watching online portion of it, maybe do that. Wow. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing great. All right, next up. This is, as far as I can tell, I think this is just a preprint, and I'm just bringing it up because I'm sure that they will continue to talk about it, and it's, you know, it's always good to know what people are publishing by press release, is sort of the pejorative term. And again, this may be a paper, I just haven't been able to find it in my own literature review, so I think this is a preprint. And this is a question answering system that does quantitative reasoning, so like math problems, basically. So knowing that like 4 is less than 5. I almost said 4 is less than 3. That's not a thing you would expect a quantitative reasoning system to know. That's what that system is. So if you hear people talking about Minerva, that's what the system is. And also new, oh my God, sorry, that was a big pop-up. And also DeepMind, which is, I'm choosing my words carefully here, an AI research institute which has a lot of HR problems. Let me put it that way, particularly if, yes, there have been a lot of instances of them handling sexual assault cases very badly. And also, I believe one of the founders resigned because of sustained bullying. So I hope that DeepMind is getting better, but in terms of like places to work, it's never been high on my list due to, again, the pretty bad social problems they have. But they are collaborating with the Francis Crick Institute to work on biotechnological applications of AI. I like seeing subject matter experts taking the lead on projects and, you know, cross-disciplinary collaboration. Happy to see that. And hopefully this will be, you know, a good model where maybe the subject matter experts get to drive the boat a little bit, but we'll see. Med says, isn't Minerva just Palm fine-tuned on the data set? So not really something novel. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't read the paper. I just noticed a lot of people talking about it and was like, well, we should probably say what this system is. Also out of DeepMind, this just happened to, they're pushing out a lot of stuff right now, is this paper in Nature. And I mentioned a while ago, I don't expect everybody to watch every coffee chat, but Nature and science papers can sometimes be a little weird from the perspective of somebody working in a discipline, right? So there's been a lot of papers on language, for example, that get published in Nature and Science that most linguists strenuously disagree with the basic premises of. Let me just put it that way. So even though it's like a very, you know, fancy pants journal that everybody knows about and is very prestigious, I wouldn't necessarily equate that to always being very well-grounded research that really builds on a lot of existing work. Yeah. Hi, Andre. Welcome to the stream. But I thought that this was a pretty interesting project. So basically the idea here is that they were using so they had an online investment game sort of system. People started with different amounts of money and, you know, there were different things that you could do. And they were using a machine learning approach to try and, you know, address some of the problems in the online investment games, right? So initial wealth disparity, sanctioning free riders, so people who, you know, didn't put into the system but received a lot from the system. And what they found is that the participants really liked the output and sort of decisions made by the system. So it successfully won majority votes. The majority of players liked the output of the system. So I think that this is an interesting approach. I think it's a cool study. I mean, I don't really work in this field, right? This almost feels like game theory. If any of you are more familiar with this work, please feel free to chime in the chat. I'd like to have more context. But what really stuck out to me from sort of an ethics standpoint is that majority vote. I mean, obviously they're looking for a democratic system, so they want a system that can get the majority vote, but doesn't necessarily always mean good outcomes for everybody in the population, right? Especially if parts of the population are minoritized or just have less voting power, right? So like one example would be children. Right? Children can't vote, but, you know, they have a vested interest in how society turns out. And sort of you hope that when people are voting, they're thinking about, you know, children and their needs and the long-term future, but you can't guarantee that. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about democracy. To be clear, I am a fan of democracy. Self-determination is something that's very important to me as a core value that I have as a person, but I don't know that a AI system getting majority vote necessarily means that that is a good and or useful system. Necessarily. But it could be interesting signal. Also, I'm just realizing I didn't share the link to the second video I said I would, so let me do that real quick in the chat too. Abhishek says, majority vote loses information. Yeah, definitely. And especially if you're in a situation where majority vote, this one, can end up disenfranchising some people. So if the majority vote, right, removes votes from portions of the population, then the majority of the voting population is now less representative, right? So in a lot of states, felons can't vote, convicted felons, in the United States. And I know I often talk about things in the US context, but that's where I'm from, so sorry about it. And as a result, you know, prisoners and best interests are not represented, and you know, not just people who are currently incarcerated, but also people who have finished their term of service and are back in society, and again have a vested interest in how society turns out, just don't have any power in that situation. So anyway, I think it's cool. I think it's an interesting approach. I think it's good signal. I don't think that a system that wins majority vote is automatically going to be good for folks, if that makes sense. Anyway. And then this is a really cool paper I'd love to read, but wow, is it paywalled? It is so expensive. Yeah, it's $100. I guess I could buy PDF access for $32, but I don't want to. Yeah. Anyway, but it does look really cool. So languages change. I don't think this is, I don't know, maybe this is news to folks. Languages change over time. It's a natural process. All languages do it if they are currently being used by people. And a lot of things affect that change, like what changes people make. So a good example in English is we lost our second person plural pronouns, or sorry, second person singular pronouns. So if you've ever seen like thee and thou, that's like you and y'all, right? The second person pronoun, but it's for one. And we lost it through language change. And part of the reason we lost it is because people were being extra polite and they just sort of stopped doing it. But this paper, two things that I really like about it. So one, it talks about aesthetics, like what seems pleasing as a factor in language change, which we don't often talk about in sociolinguistics. So I think that's really a cool thing. And the other is that it really brings in non-Western approaches. So the West being, you know, the US and Europe. I shouldn't say the US, Canada, Europe, and Oceania, basically. To that sort of way of thinking about aesthetics and then how that might affect language change. And this is in the annual review of anthropology. Yeah, and it sounds like a cool paper. It'll be published in October. So I guess if you are have access to a university library, maybe check it out. Arvind, how are you? I'm doing good. How are you doing? Hi, Robbie. Abhishek says reviewers should charge a fee to review papers. Yeah, so I mean, we'll talk about peer review for just a second. To answer Andre's question, do I have a book about classical game theory? I sure don't. I do not. Pretty much everything I've learned about game theory has been as an illustrative example in probability courses. So I don't have a good book to recommend. So the way that peer review works, well, we're in the research section, is that your work is reviewed by other researchers working in the same field to have, you know, a in-depth, I wouldn't say complete, but an in-depth understanding of the field, of what other people are working on and what the specific contribution of the work is, and also, you know, your methods, how you did it, and through their experience and through their knowledge, they can help review the quality of the work. And in theory, it is part of the discipline of being a researcher, right? So if you are a faculty member at a research university, there's an expectation that you will publish research, and there's an expectation that you will be part of the peer review process. That said, peer review is done for free. Like, the idea is that it's part of your salary covers that you do peer review. Although there are no benefits to doing peer review to you as an individual, right? You're improving the system, but it doesn't really help you. I mean, I guess it gives you time to read in depth, but it takes a long time to closely peer review a paper. So even a short paper, like a 4-page paper in a field that I am very familiar with, takes me a couple hours to peer review, because you're not just reading it, you're reading it, you're considering it deeply, you're offering feedback to the authors. And then you're deciding whether or not, well, you're providing information about whether or not it should be published. You don't usually get to make that decision as a peer reviewer. So for things like ACL, the reviewers work for free. The sort of assumption is if you are submitting papers to review, you are also working as a reviewer. And then the papers are available for free. In many other fields, academic publishers publish the papers. They do like the typesetting, basically, is what you're paying for. But everyone who works on the journal basically is a volunteer who's an academic, and the people who publish research in the journal don't get paid. So the money here, right? The $100 or $32 to read this article goes directly to whoever publishes annual reviews. I don't know who that is, and does not in fact go to the authors or the reviewers. So yeah, you don't make money doing research. Like, I have a chapter in a book, for example, and my payment was that I got a copy of the book. And I felt good about myself, basically. And if you're working as an academic, right, if you want to get, so we'll talk about tenure in just a sec, actually, but if you want to get tenure, you need to have a lot of papers published, basically. So that's why you do it. You don't really have a choice if you want to continue to do your job. Anyway, that's what peer review is like. Robbie says also in economics. Okay, so I'm guessing economics is the same thing, where you have to pay a lot of money. And usually university libraries pay that money. Arvin says, I recently completed a machine learning boot camp, and I have to start learning about deep learning. What should I do now? Should I go for TensorFlow or PyTorch? Can I suggest to you some resources to learn? Corky says it's not on Sci-Hub either. Well, I mean, it says it's not going to be out until October. So maybe in the future would be a good time to look. So Arvind, I mean, people use both, right? And I would say that, you're picking which one you start with. I don't think it's reasonable to assume, like, you're not going to be able to use just one programming language for your whole career, right? Like, I started with R, but these days I use Python, I use Bash, I use SQL, etc. I'm probably in the future we'll all be using some other programming language, right? Like, when my mom learned to program, she learned like COBOL and Fortran and BASIC, and I don't know those languages. So yeah, expect to continue learning. And what I would actually do is, if you were looking for a specific job at a specific place, right, you have like a dream company, find out what they're using and learn that one. And in terms of specific resources, the Fast AI folks are pretty good. I've talked about them before, Jeremy Howard and Rachel Thomas, not me. Rachel Thomas and Rachel Tapmans are different Rachels. But yeah, that's a good place if you really just want to get down to the nitty gritty of learning to do deep learning practically. They might use Keras. I don't know off the top of my head. And I think you can also use Keras with a PyTorch backend. So Keras might also be a good option. I haven't played around that much with it. So Quirky says, you're a second generation programmer? That's pretty cool. I am, yeah. My mom was a programmer in the 80s, although unfortunately she left the field before I was around. Let me put it that way. But yeah. All right. Speaking of programming, let's get into some more practical stuff. And y'all have to let me know if this is helpful for you, but I did see a couple jobs this week, so I think I'm going to start adding a couple jobs here in the practical thing if I think it's a particularly good fit for y'all. So first off, we've talked last week before, a little bit about data poisoning. And I think this is a great example of data poisoning where it's not intentional, but definitely has knock-on effects. Yeah, no worries, Arvind. Best of luck in getting into the field. I'd also say you do not need to know or use deep learning to be in machine learning. There are, particularly if you're looking more for like an analyst position, you have a lot of options there where there's not an expectation that you're going to be building deep learning systems. So. Alexi says, anyone remember Theano and lasagna? Yep. And cafe? Heady times. Yes, but I think that's a great example of how, frameworks die. Although I think Theano is actually now actively maintained again. I vaguely remember that. Anyway, data poisoning. So data poisoning is when, so as an attack, right, as an adversarial attack, it is when data is inserted into a data set maliciously in order to change the behavior of models trained on that data, right? And in this case, I don't think that that is what is happening here, but these are sort of examples of things that data that is incorrect, but findable, right? So, and I know a lot of us have used Wikipedia data. I know I have. I imagine many of you have. It's got a pretty permissive license. And apparently in the Chinese language Wikipedia, there are over 200 articles about Russian history that are just straight up fake. So if you are using the Chinese language Wikipedia for, validating your question answering systems, for example, and any of your questions were on Russian history, the likelihood that you're going to get nonsense answers is kind of high. So, and I'll pop this in the chat as well, because I think it's just a really interesting story. But yeah, and this is not even the not even the only time that I know of recently where Wikipedia data has been completely faked. But yeah. Be ye careful, be ye warned. Corky says, I think Theano is still alive. Last release is in July 2020. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's being maintained by somebody. Robbie says, every library you see is inspired by Torch. It's released in 2002. I mean, yeah. There's a lot of, cross-pollination, let's say, in software in general. And another example of sort of data poisoning, but again, I think it is not, the purpose of creating the false data is not to break machine learning systems, but I think that it might. So there is, some of y'all may be familiar with this, but there is life insurance in India that is pretty affordable and where the payouts are, pretty large given the input. So there is a wave of on paper people dying that is fraud, right? So the people are not dead, but their deaths have been reported so that the life insurance payouts can be claimed. So again, the data is just wrong. It is not reflective of the world. And I think that this is really helpful to think about and keep in mind at all times. Don't trust. Just be, super paranoid 100% of the time when you're working with data, because particularly if you're a student, right, you may not have come across things like this before, and you may just sort of believe the data that's in the data set is correct and representative of the world, but there is no guarantee of that. I think these are two situations where the data in a data set is systematically wrong in a way that would affect systems, but where data poisoning was not the intention. But consider that also sometimes people will definitely do data poisoning. I would, I'll eat my hat if there's not some data poisoning in GitHub that was designed to trip up systems like Copilot. And hopefully the GitHub folks have, filtered that out, but who knows? All right. Yeah, that's Quirky's bringing up another point. That was the thing with Scots Wikipedia. Some dude who didn't even know the language was writing an article in pirate pretending it was Scots. Yep. Yeah, there's been, particularly for non-English data, there is a lot of data quality issues. Yep. Hi, old player. Oh, Andre says, in the link above, it's not modern Russian, but the ancient Slavic church language in the manuscript. Oh, helpful. Thank you. So, and we talked about tenure a while ago, and I said we'd come back to it, and here we are, coming back to it. One of these days, I might organize these things by sort of more specific topic rather than broad heading, but it helps me stay organized, so. So, tenure, if you're not familiar, is so basically there's this idea of academic freedom and research freedom, and if you are just focusing on what's immediately commercially viable, you're not going to get a lot of basic research done that doesn't have any benefits right now, but might have benefits, 10, 20, 30 years in the future. So a good example of that would be coronavirus research, right? It's the virus that causes the common cold. If you were looking for medical funding, 15 years ago, people probably wouldn't be tripping over themselves to fund common cold research. But important class of viruses to know about, as it turns out. So the sort of general idea with research freedom is that you should be able to research what you want and what you think is going to have, long-term positive effects on humanity, et cetera, et cetera. Tenure is a way to protect the ability of researchers, and particularly faculty researchers, to do that. So usually after you get hired, if you are hired into a position that might offer tenure, which is not all of them, you go through a very, very difficult process. So basically you need to get, a lot of publications that are being reviewed, that are being cited, that are influential in the field. You need to have letters of recommendation from other people in your field saying like, yes, so-and-so is an excellent researcher. Here are the reasons why I support them getting tenure. It's a big process. You can be denied. It happens kind of a lot. But if you get tenure, then basically you have that position and you're pretty much guaranteed you can keep having that position, even if you're researching something that, again, isn't immediately commercially viable, right? So even if you're not bringing in, $10,000 of grant funding every quarter, you can still keep doing research and keep your job. That's the basic idea of tenure. It's an important part of sort of the Western academic tradition. And apparently, in Italy, they have added some sort of automated process using topic modeling of the candidates' publications, right? So every paper you've ever published will be topic modeled, and if the topic model isn't great, you just aren't eligible for tenure, perhaps. Just really, I would not do this, right? Tenure is a very high stakes process. It requires a lot of expert domain knowledge, right? Like, I don't know a thing about organic chemistry, right? You could hand me someone's tenure file who works in organic chemistry, and I just don't have the ability to know whether or not they're a good researcher or not, whether or not they're a good teacher. It requires a lot of domain expertise, and automating this process is bad. Would not recommend. Anyway, and then the source for it is in Italian. But yep, so should not be doing that. And if you were in Italy, I would maybe reach out to your legislatures and be like, what the heck are you doing? Please don't. Corky says this kind of automatic topic modeling happens a lot when applying for jobs through portals. No wonder job hunting is so frustrating. Yeah, absolutely. I think that employment at all is a place where we should not be doing automation. That's my stance. I 100% agree. Anyway, just sort of like on the general topic of practical stuff. If y'all don't know Lynn Cherny, she is a, NLP person. She's data science, really cool, great follow on Twitter if you're looking for more cool people to follow. And she has a monthly, I think, newsletter, and this month it had, I'll post the link for this one as well for y'all if you want to check it out. And this week it just had a lot of cool stuff in it. So a lot of discussion of art, and then some more discussion of different text to images stuff, and also some text generation, various artist tools, some of which are automated, some of which are not, which I just think is neat. So yeah, and then some like gaming stuff. I don't know. It's a cool newsletter. I thought this one had a lot of particular relevance to the channel for discussion of AI and art, and also text generation, and also some, research from conferences and things like that. So yeah, check it out. There's a lot in there. I don't want to go through it all in detail, but it's by Lincery, and it's Things I Think Are Awesome is the newsletter. So if you like my channel, you might also like our stuff. All right. Also, speaking of art, this one is going to be in Berlin? ? Let me double check and not say wrong things. I feel pretty sure it is in Berlin. So this is a summer school about art and AI, and they are accepting applications for artists working in AI. And I believe that they will cover the cost of the course and food, but not travel or lodging. So if you have a cheap place to stay in, I'm pretty sure Berlin. Yes, it is in Berlin. Might be a cool thing to check out, or if you know any artists that you want to pass this on to. It's the AI Anarchies Autumn School, and it will be in October, which is coming up before you know it. So, all right, and then, this one, Jiminy Cricket. I don't know if you all heard about this. This is real bad. Yeah, so this is potentially the largest leak in history. Over 1 billion people were affected, and from my understanding, what happened is, I don't know if you heard that. That was my dog. Sometimes he makes laser sounds, especially if he doesn't think he's getting quite enough attention. Hey, Benson, you want to come in here and say hi? Jingle, 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 jingle. Anyway, so my understanding is what happens is that these data files were just on an unsecured web link, and somebody found them and then deleted the files and then offered them for sale back again. So it is very personal data on about 1 billion people, and this there's 2 Karen Hoes, and I don't know how to help you tell the difference between the two, but I'm pretty sure this is not the one who mainly works in AI. This is the one who mainly works in Chinese tech policy. Brett says puppy laser, and Jay says puppy. Yep. I don't think he wants to come in right now. That's okay. One second. I really need to make a mute button. Anyway. Yeah, so that's bad. I don't know, just important news we should know about. And I would also maybe keep an eye out for maybe models trained on demographic data from China for the next little bit, and just see if you can make sure you know what their data set is. Yeah. Med says, I heard it was some Elasticsearch index that was leaked. Yeah. Bad time. I really hope that everyone whose data was stolen does not have negative impacts to their life because of it. In good news, the GPU shortage is over. I don't know if any of y'all have tried to buy GPUs recently, but the prices are back down. We love to hear it. It seems like supply chain issues are more or less clearing up, and also crypto crashed, which means that we don't have to deal with them to the same degree anymore. So if you need to get yourself a GPU, now is the time. Do it, do it, do it. Which is fabulous. And these cards here in the picture, according to this caption, are under MSRP, or merchant suggested retail price. So if you're looking for a bargain on a chip, do it. Now's the time. Brett says, is this the leak that included prisoners' photo data? I don't know. And Brett says, almost over, top of the line are still above RRP. Okay, good to know. But, it's possible. It's possible to find them and, pay not through the nose. Paying through the nose means a lot of money. Like, it makes your eyes water, like eating mustard. I apologize if I explain things that y'all already know, but I also know that I tend to use a lot of colorful idioms that if you're not American or not from the South, you may not have heard before. So I try to be inclusive. All right. Next up, thread from Emily Bender. Great researcher, great linguist. You probably know her. I don't need to introduce her. Anyway, but I think this is particularly relevant for us as technologists because there is a lot of misleading news about AI out there, and it affects us negatively, right? Like in the near term, it means that people think that we can do things that we straight up cannot do and then ask us to do them. And then we have a bad time because they're asking for something that's not possible. And in the longer term, I think it fuels, intense speculation in the field, leading to a lot more volatility. There's lots of layoffs right now. I know that's affecting a lot of folks. And it's important to be honest and accurate when we talk about technology and its capabilities. One sec, let me block this person. Port. All right. I think I got all of them. Apologies. Yeah, it is good to use on GPUs. Med says there's still a shortage for bigger machines. We're trying to buy a DGX A100 at our lab and haven't succeeded yet. Ugh, that stinks. I mean, best of luck. I hope you get one. I mean, the nice thing about GPUs is you can federate with them more than you can with other systems. So you could always do the, the three children in a trench coat version of a better GPU. I realize it's not as good, but apparently not, Brett. Apparently not. Sorry, I just removed a bunch of stuff from the chat, and that's what that was in response to. Yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to. Nope. Nope, there isn't that I can find. I'm gonna give myself a little to-do though. Also, it was in the user's name and not their actual text that they were saying, which is Anyway, so blah, 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 rewind, lots of misleading reporting on our field, which is bad. Robbie says, crypto can be regained again. Well, I hope not. I am not a fan, let me put it that way. So these are some recommendations from Emily Bender about potentially things that we could do, as a society, as a field, to help with situations where there is incorrect reporting on AI, basically. And we're going to talk about the story they're talking about in the politics or ethics section. I don't remember which one. So one is, journalists, please do better. I've been fortunate enough to, chat with quite a few journalists in my time. Many of them are fabulous. And I really appreciate the work they do, but it's important to not be too credulous in that line of work, and that includes with technology. So, yeah, important. And for researchers, we need to don't mislead people, right? Be honest about your system and its capabilities. So there was, the discussion recently about the secret language of of DALL-E and the way that it was producing text and images that sometimes related to other text that sometimes could be used to generate related images. And I think that was dramatically overstated in a way that was potentially designed to mislead people and gain media attention. And don't do that. Don't do that. And if I, notice you doing it, I may reach out to you and ask you not to. We're all adults. We can do what we want, but, it's bad. It's bad for all of us. It's bad for us as researchers. It's bad for us as people living in the society. And it, undermines people's trust in us and our technology. Yeah, and then this thing. So I've talked about the sort of like published by press release sort of thing, where you commercial labs, and it's almost exclusively commercial labs, right? Like laboratories that are attached to a company and eventually designed to make money will create a big press release. They'll reach out to reporters to be like, we've built the best system ever, blah, 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 blah. And instead of going through the peer review process where peers who know about the field and know how it works look at it first and are like, yeah, it's good work, or what are you talking about? You know, this is a Palm with fine tuning, perhaps. To a little callback to earlier in the stream. You have immediate attention, and like everyone who's in the field is caught back-footed, and like by that point it's too late, right? Like I can't anonymously peer review, you know, the paper that OpenAI has, you know, been knocking on the door of every news agency in town telling them to talk about. So yeah, it's poor scholarship. And finally, as you know, as people working in the field, as people with knowledge of these systems and their benefits and their drawbacks and their limitations, we got to talk about it. We got to tell people, hey, that thing where somebody said something absolutely wild, they may or may not have been lying, right? Like they may believe what they're saying, but in the context of a field as a whole, that claim is unjustifiable. And here's why. So it is frustrating because it takes way more effort to like try and walk somebody back from believing a fantastical claim than it does to get them to believe that fantastical claim in the first part, at least. But it's important. So anyway, and you know, what do I do? Well, we talk about it on stream, and I hope it's helpful. Yeah, and also knowing a lot about the domain that the project is in can be super, super helpful. So seeking out domain experts when you hear about something to learn about, you know, what's going on can be really, really valuable. Oh my God. Again, not great. Alexi says, there's a Twitter account which writes things about World War II. In one post, they wrote how Hitler attacked Ukraine. The thing is that they use trigger words which attack Kremlin bots. They started to make replies protecting the attack on Ukraine. They didn't care that it happened in 1941. Noted. Yeah, bots can be a problem. Have I not blocked the account? They should be, the only things that I can do is I can hide them on the channel and put them in timeout. But they are actually two separate accounts. So that's a fun thing. Yeah, I don't seem to have that ability. I've reported them. I will say this for Twitch, a lot more fine-grained control of the chat. Yeah, I've done what I can. Let's see, is this something where I can maybe... I can't do it right from the chat, right, is the issue. Yeah. Yeah, if y'all could report those comments if you can still see them, I'd appreciate that. Anyway, speaking of bots and being problems, yep. All right. Also, my account's not monetized, so I imagine that might have something to do with my lack of fine-grained controls. Anyway, on to slightly nicer things. So this is from Africa, Kenya, who is a web developer and also a therapist and yoga instructor. And she started a newsletter that is bi-weekly. And I don't know if that is every 2 weeks or twice a week. But it's lots of yoga specifically for tech workers, which I don't know about you. Oh my God. All right, those are hidden. Sorry, one sec. I'm gonna pop open the live studio and see what I can do. This is kind of a problem. Anyway, I'm just gonna leave this nice stretch break up so you can check that out really quick. Yeah, I don't have any additional options in here either. Fabulous, love it, great. Great. Love to see it. Also, it's showing up in top chat, which is also fabulous. Anyway, it's great to be on the internet. Oh, there's lots of good things about it, but also there's some very bad ones. Yeah, I think that unfortunately, I don't know that I have access to that feature. Once I have started the stream, let's see. If I can do it from the stream, I don't see it. And also, it may be one of those things that is only available to monetized accounts. Yeah, subscribers only live chat would be great, but I think that that's something that's only available to monetized accounts, and sometimes it's really hard to keep up with what's going on YouTube. Anyway, yeah, so yoga specifically for us at our desks. Yeah, and if you are feeling like a lot of muscle tension for some reason, this might be a nice thing to check out. So it's Coding Therapist is the account, and then if you are logged in, you'll see a way to subscribe here. So I am looking forward to getting that. Oh, Brett's checking blocked words. Yeah, I think the thing is that they are happening, the words are blocked in the chat. They are not blocked in usernames. And each one of these accounts has been a different username. So, love it. Abuse mitigation and detection, not a solved problem. Okay. Other things. So this I haven't actually read yet, but I like some of the StatQuest stuff, so it generally tends to be pretty high quality. And I would, if you're looking for a good illustrated guide, this might be a cool thing to check out. So this is what's in it. Yeah, and I saw somebody posted about really liking it and had a couple like shares of pages in the book, and it looked cool and useful. So yeah, maybe something to check out. And that is sorry, I didn't actually say what it does. The StatQuest Illustrated Guide to Machine Learning PDF. So should be, fun and accessible. Yeah, no, I like the StatQuest stuff. I started my sort of like math and modeling background in statistics rather than in machine learning, and then sort of moved into machine learning. So yes, I quite like statistics, and I think this is a good educational resource. Okay, next up, jobs, and I got 3 of them. So the first is at the University of York, and this is a postdoc, so it's precarious, right? I think it's for fixed term, and I don't know how long that term is. Like an hour, 2 hours, an hour, a year, 2 years, not sure. Yeah, and it is specifically, this project is on person-specific ASR, so automatic speech recognition for individual users. Yashavi, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, says, please talk about grouping news events together like Google News. Is that more of a text similarity problem? Yes, that is a specific task, actually. I think it's like news event detection. There's actually quite a lot of work on it in social media, right? So detecting when a newsworthy event is happening. I'm just going to quickly just look something up super quick. News event detection. Not event detection in news. That's something separate. Yeah, you could use topic modeling if you already have the all the text in the news article. That could be a way to do it. But sort of like general unsupervised clustering techniques are what I would do there. And I actually do have, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. Text. Yeah, okay, so this is from 2019. So it's a little bit, so it's a little bit older, but I do have a, I'll pop this link in the chat as well. I do have a talk that I did a while ago, and these are just the slides from it, on different types of unsupervised text classification and clustering, and different things that people do, and I asked on Twitter about it. And here are some just sort of, I'm just skimming through this because I know y'all have the link, but just some particular solutions that people have used, and you could try out for this particular question. Although I don't know, it sounds like it's an unlabeled problem, right? That you're trying to determine which events happen together. So Med says the salary's a bit low for the postdoc. So it is not. That is a pretty normal salary for a postdoc. If you're not familiar with a postdoc, it is a postdoctoral research position, which means you have a PhD. And I would say 30 to 40,000 pounds is right in there. There's actually something in the ethics section. Yeah, academics are paid very, very poorly. And I think this is, like, I know we talked about how, you know, you're not paid for publishing research. I think this is something that's not general knowledge, right? Is that, you know, if you are working as a professor or working as a grad student, you don't get paid a lot. So when I was in grad school, I actually, in Seattle, I applied for housing assistance, right? And I did not make enough money to qualify for subsidized housing in Seattle, because I would have spent too much of my income on the subsidized rent. Yep. Like, I'm fine. It's fine. But yes, it is not a well-paid career. Yeah. Yeah, you're very welcome, Yushavi. I hope that helps. Med says, I'm doing my PhD in Germany and I get the same. Yeah, I do think it is better some places than others. I also know the UK is in the middle of sort of like dismantling their university system right now, it sounds like, from my friends who work in the UK. So yeah, it might be particularly bad. Alexi says, thank you, I'll stay in industry. Yeah, it pays way better. Way better. Speaking of industry jobs, so this one is at Grammarly, and this is actually like smack dab in the middle of what we talk about here. So they are looking for an analytical linguist for the ethical AI team. You'll submit your sociolinguistics expert by learning about the functionality of Grammarly's product offerings, staying up to date on developments in language, and collaborating with cross-functional partners, blah, 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 corporate speak. But basically this role is to look at language data and try and figure out if there are biases in it that result in problems for specific users in the finished product. Yeah, Robbie says the professor's salary is huge in university. Oh, not really. Here, we can actually... Anyway, so this job, if you have a sociolinguistic background and are, you know, knowledgeable about AI, I think this would be a perfect job. Speaking of salaries, because if they're also looking in Colorado, the salary range for this position is $117,000 to $214,000 a year. I am not applying for this position, A, because I like what I'm doing now, but B, it's also a hybrid working model. So they expect you to come into one of their hubs a couple weeks a quarter, which is a minimum of 2 months total a year, which is more than I'm willing to do. So yeah, so let's just quickly look at I'm quickly going to pull up something. So the thing about the United States system is that a lot of the universities are run by the state, right? So the information about the salaries is public information because they're public employees. So if we pop open this is for the University of Washington. So this is where I got my PhD. So I mentioned this is for somebody who has tenure. It is a very hard process. These are for those who have tenure or tenure track. And this is for lecturers, artists and residents, teaching associates, and instructors. So something to keep in mind is that in university systems, they are moving away from having tenure line positions and moving towards having, lecturers and educators, right? So basically, instead of, like with the York position, instead of having a job that you can stay at that's guaranteed to continue being there for even like 2 years, you have a 6-month position. And you may or may not actually have that position be renewable. And in a lot of cases, it won't be, right? So you can only have this job for 6 months, then you need to find another job. And oftentimes, it's also not a full-time position, right? So it'll be half-time, right? Because you're only teaching a certain amount of hours, and because you're only teaching a certain amount of hours, they don't cover things like health insurance. So if we are looking at, lecturers, artists and residents, teaching associates, and instructors. So this is what I'd be doing, right? If I took a university teaching position right now, the 12-month monthly salary is, 400. Monthly is 281. So if you had a full year of teaching assignments, which is not likely, right? Because you have to also teach summer quarter. That is, I'm doing this in another tab, that's $51,000 a year. For this position, you would need a PhD. You would need a PhD in the field that you are teaching in. And the median salary at the University of Washington is in Seattle. So it's in a very expensive place to live. The median salary for households inside Seattle city limits is $102,000. So you'd be making less than half the median. And if you are at the very, very top of the pay scale, right, absolutely all the way up there, tenured professor, full professor, you're at the top of your career, that would be $81,000 a year, which again is less than the median salary in the United States, in Seattle specifically. So in a world-class teaching university, if you are at absolutely the top of your the top of your field, you would be making less than the median income in that area. And I use it for University of Washington because I've taught there, and that's where Emily Bender is, right? And it can go up, right? This is the minimum, but they are not required to. And I realize $81,000 a year is not nothing, right? That's a pretty good income. It's more than I'd say most people in the US make, but you need a PhD, right? You've been in school for a really long time. And in order to become a tenure track professor, you have to be, A, very lucky, B, very good at what you do, and C, produce a lot of publications. It is not an easy career field. And also just for reference, a police officer in Seattle makes around $100,000 a year after their first year of employment. So more than a tenure track professor at the absolute peak of their career. So I think that in global terms, yes, that's a lot of money. In terms of other occupations that somebody with that level of education could have, it really isn't. Yep. Medsu's DeepL is also offering a lot of positions at the time, if any are interested. Oh, good tip. And it's a very prestigious position. So I think a lot of people assume because there's a lot of respect associated with it, it gets paid really well, but it absolutely does not. George says, sorry if it bothers someone, but I think academics deserve better. I cry for the USA. Yep. And Corky says, to be fair, often senior professors have side gigs that are actually very well paid. Some startup industry role consulting. Yeah, in some fields, right? In computer science, you can definitely do that. In, formal syntax, those are a little bit lighter on the ground. Yeah. And I don't know, I've been realizing more and more recently that I haven't talked a lot about academia and research, and that there's a lot of assumptions that are extremely reasonable and also wrong about that most people have about how research and academia works. Yep. Well, speaking of jobs, if you were interested in going into tech, so the Black Tech Pipeline was founded by Paris Athena, and its goal is to get more Black people into tech and ideally keep them there. I think attrition, particularly of people from minoritized backgrounds, is a pretty big problem in the field. But the Black Tech Pipeline has, for each job that is posted, the company provides a lot of additional information to basically help folks figure out if they want to work there or not. So this is the job board. I'll just post this in the link as well. And yeah, particularly if you you have folks who are looking to get into tech who may be Black or who are looking for new jobs, good resource to share out. All right. Also, if you're hiring, good place to post jobs as well. And I believe it is a paid job board. So the companies have paid to paste their jobs here. All right. Politics. Something lighter. It's not that much lighter. And we're going to start with a low note. So I mentioned, I won't be doing that, thank you. So I mentioned that the article, the response that Emily Bender had to misleading articles we talk about later, it's this one. This is impossible for a number of reasons. So, those of you who aren't familiar with sort of the history of the US, there was this big thing of predictive policing in, I want to say the 80s, the 90s is when it got really big. And the idea is that, we predict where the crime was going to happen. And what happened was that a lot of people were harassed because of it. And in particular, this really, really negatively affected Black communities in the US due to a lot of reasons. Racism, right? It's the US. It's always going to be racism. It'll always come down to that. Anyway, and now we have the same thing all over again, except it's, tech washed, right? It's got like the magic, the computer said sprinkled over it. But part of the reason why it's impossible for this to happen is because in the United States, we have presumption of innocence. So you cannot predict crime. Everyone is always assumed innocent until they are proven guilty. Oh, hey, bud. You want to come up and say hi? Yeah? That's it. Hop up. Yes, I have a treat. Would you like to hop up? No? Okay. Yeah, one sec. I'll scoop in so you can say hi. Squeak, squeak, squeak. I am the world's squeakiest chair. There he is. Hello, Benson. Yes, you're very cute. This is my dog. Oh, scritch, 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 scritch. Yeah, anyway, so, impossible, extremely misleading to claim that this is possible, and really misleads people about the abilities of systems. Brett says, stop and frisk. Yeah. Sorry, the crunching is him. I don't know why it did not occur to me that it would be audible, but so it is. Brett says Puffy. Yeah. He's full grown. He's probably 3. Oh, he's a rescue. Yep. Quirky says, I really dislike academia, even though I'm employed in an academia adjacent role. Lots of big egos and misaligned incentives. Sorry for mentioning. No, I think there's, some pretty big problems in the field. There's a reason I'm not in it anymore. And And one of the big problems and reasons for me is just like no consequence for sexual harassment. Anyway, we can talk about that another time. Brent says stop and frisk should only be petting dogs for petting dogs. I agree. Not this one though. He's not very helpful. I find him helpful. He's not very friendly. And his name is Benson. I know. Sorry, I'll put you back down. He really likes being in my lap while I'm on video meetings, and he knows this isn't a video meeting, which is why he's been grumpy about it. Yes, you can have this one too. George says, so Minority Report and Psycho-Pass are finally here. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And we don't have enough Tom Cruise or Kane to balance the situation. Yeah, I mean, what we have is ourselves, right? We have technologists who know that this is an issue and can make sure that everybody else knows and reach out to our legislators. Yep. Clarky says, hello, Benson. There are some more tweets over here, and he's very interested in them. So also on sort of the politics side of things, one sec, I'm gonna have some water. I know. You can just see his little nose. Whoop. He's very interested in everything. Yes. Yeah, I know. Two U.S. senators, Rob Portman, Republican Ohio, and Gary Peters, Democrat Michigan. That's with the D in the Army. I means independent. You're not going to see that one much. Have introduced a legislation about global catastrophic risks. And one of them is the risk of artificial intelligence and other emergent technologies from being abused in ways that may pose a catastrophic risk. It's important that the federal government prepare for unlikely yet catastrophic events like AI systems gone awry, new strains of disease, biotechnology accidents, or naturally occurring risks such as supervolcanoes or solar flares that, though unlikely to occur, the consequences of an occurrence would be exceptionally lethal. Yes, so I agree that automated systems are a pretty big risk. I think they're thinking about things like the singularity, right? And this is why it's an issue when we mislead people about systems, because some of those people are legislators and spend, limited political capital on things that aren't real and not things that are real. Anyway, so I don't know if it's going to pass or not. Probably not, but there you go. They're doing it. And speaking of legislation, oh, you're so wiggly. Speaking of legislation, two things that we've been talking about, and I've been like, it's not passed yet, are now passed. And they are the Digital Markets Act, which we haven't really been talking about. I think that's mainly an anti-monopoly bill, and the Digital Services Act. So this is going to be really impactful for folks working with data from people in the EU, which is, honestly, probably most of us. And it requires online platforms to do more to police the internet for illegal companies face fines of up to 10% of annual global turnover. That's a lot if you're, let's say, a Google, for DMA violations and up to 6% for DSA breaches. Lawmakers and EU states have reached a political deal on both rule books earlier this year, leaving some details to be ironed out. So we've been talking about it. I've been like, I don't know, it's not passed yet. It's passed now. It's all of our problems. I don't think it's a problem. I think the Digital Services Act in particular had a lot of good stuff in it that I'd like to see available more widely. Keep an eye out. I'm sure you're all going to get corporate trainings. George says, I wonder if the doomsday clock is also applicable to risky AI. I mean, in that it's accelerating climate change, sure. I don't think the doomsday clock includes climate change. If you're unfamiliar, it was a clock representation of how close nuclear war was, basically. And I probably still maintained somewhere by someone. And just like a very interesting data visualization choice for risk of nuclear war. So DSA is passed. It's going to affect us. There are definitely some legislative bits in there that, sorry if you can hear grumbling, it's him, apply to AI systems in particular. Also, in the news, this one is from India, and this is Twitter seeking a judicial review of Indian government orders to take down content. Basically, there were some requests from government officials to remove content from Twitter, and Twitter saying, like, we don't want to do that. We think that's an abuse of power by those officials. So it's now in court. TBD. And we've talked a little bit about moderation on the channel before, and I think this is a, very political form of moderation for sure. All right. This one. So Virginia's a state in the United States. It's where I am and where I'm from. You don't feel goo-goody? I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're referencing there. I'm not super familiar with the situation. But, I think it is generally applicable, right? How and when information can be taken down and who makes that decision. So we talked last week about the Argentinian case with the, oh, goodbye. I'm covered in dog hair now. I don't know if you can see it. We talked last week about the Argentinian case with the right to be forgotten and how Google said that there is none and the courts agreed with them. So in that case, an individual couldn't remove information about themselves from Google search results. And in this case, Twitter's saying like, hey, we get to decide, not you, what goes up and what stays down, which, yeah. I don't know. I'm not an expert on content moderation. I'm just somebody living in this world. Gosh darn it again. Oh, tickle. Thank you. Brett says India does need moderation system. They have crazy hate groups. Yeah, I mean, same. Hold, please. I'll be right back. I'm back. Sorry, my dog got a squeaky toy, so I closed the door so we didn't have to hear quite so much squeaking. Yeah, I mean, India's not the only place that has lots of crazy hate groups that are not being, moderated. Let me put it that way. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an open question, right? Who decides what's allowable in a public forum? And I mean, in the United States, we have a constitutional right to freedom of speech that applies to the government, right? So that governmentally, the US is limited in what can be done. But most of the tech companies are in the United States, and these are platforms deciding what they can and can't host. And I think it's important to do that, right? If you are hosting a platform, you're responsible for what's on it. But yeah. Brett says there must be some software out there that uses the YouTube API for chat moderation. Yeah. In theory, my streaming service does it, but it doesn't really work. So. George says, and I wonder if the BRICS actually take the AI discussions seriously, what will the narrative be like? I'm going to quickly look what BRICS is. An acronym coined to associate 5 major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Yeah, no idea. On the one hand, moderation is important. I think that non-platforming, dangerous, hateful speech is very important. We talked last week. We had that example of how, lack of moderation allowed a fringe conspiracy theory to create a, core group of extremists. But at the same time, I don't feel great about American tech companies, unilaterally taking control of what can and can't be said in the rest of the world, right? like I said, self-determination is a key value for me, and that means that people and countries and communities should be able to decide for themselves what is and isn't allowable. I don't know. This is not my key area of expertise. I just have a lot of feelings about it that are sort of mushy together. Yeah. Yeah, Andre says, no speech rights for Nazi propaganda. I mean, yeah, I agree that it should absolutely never be platformed, and it should be, you know, I strongly believe in sort of like the social power of ostracization. Like, I don't necessarily think it's always a good thing, but I think it is very powerful. But yeah, absolutely, no platform for Nazis ever. But at the same time, in the US, there are some legal protections. It doesn't mean, right? Free speech doesn't mean free listening. It doesn't mean that I have to amplify. It doesn't mean that I have to host. It doesn't mean that I can't remove it. It doesn't mean that you can say whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. But there are limitations legally in the US and what can and can't be restricted. So, for example, in Germany, Nazis can't have Twitter accounts. I don't know if you all have ever heard the sort of like hashtag thing where like Jack banned the Nazis. The reason people were asking for that is because Twitter under German law had to have a list of all the Nazis and banned them from Twitter, but they're not banned in the US, right? So, and that's a content moderation decision that's being made by a multinational corporation who is a platform who owns basically the commons. And I don't think that a single unilateral content moderation policy is going to work equally well for every individual community. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be one. Yeah, I don't know. It's complex. Brett says, the not yelling fire in a crowded building rule that gets around the free speech rule, but moderation is a hell job. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it definitely does like immediate, very bad harm to the moderators psychologically. Corky says, BRICS has far more immediate things to worry about. I mean, rising extremism and authoritarianism negatively affects a lot of places. The US, Brazil, very... particularly India. Yeah, I'm less familiar with the political environment in South Africa. Yep. George says, the social credit system in China is a wonderful, exciting, and worth studying case study, especially for the pre-crime situation. Yeah, or yeah. I'm just going to continue to say that self-determination is a key value for me, and I think that pre-crime automatically reduces self-determination. Pre-crime anything. So Quirky says I'm Indian, so yeah. And I'm sure many of you have more, you know, I'm not saying that there are not other issues. I'm saying that moderation has an effect on other issues that are very important. But yeah, no, I know particularly like the heat wave recently and like, oh God. Sorry, I know Sri Lanka in particular, I realize not India, but Sri Lanka's having like a super, super bad time right now. I think it's their country's out of fuel until July and they just declared bankruptcy. So yeah, on my mind for sure. Anyway. Onwards. Ethics. Oh, sorry, I didn't actually talk about this. Oh, this makes me so frustrated. In Virginia, the state where I am, we had a police facial recognition ban. It was the first in the South. It passed. I was so happy. And it just got gutted this legislative session. And starting July 1st, so this month, basically, you know, it's in shreds. So police can use facial recognition if they have reasonable suspicion. And police here means like campus police, right? It's very, very broadly defined. Basically, there is no ban anymore. And I am so bummed about it. I am really upset. Anyway. Yeah. Andre says, what do you think about modern military censorship in Russia? I'm not deeply familiar with it, but yeah, I think, again, censorship reduces self-determination, but at the same time, like, platforming can increase harm. I'm not saying I'm pro censorship. I'm saying that platform moderation is not the same as censorship, but that doesn't mean that all information should be freely available, right? And that it can be harmful if it is freely available. Yeah. I don't know. Some things are good, some things are bad, and there's a lot that I just don't know about because of my personal situation, and just like, I don't know. Yeah. Robbie says don't do Corona. Yeah. Ugh, bad time. Anyway, moving on. Ethics. Let's get into it. So this is like a combination of just sort of like different discussions and stuff. So speaking of, colonialism, George says values and principles are good, but not necessarily universally good or accepted. Yeah, absolutely. And like, right. So self-determination to me means that like communities and individuals have the ability to make decisions for themselves. Like, obviously we're all interconnected, and what I decide to do, even if it's in a very small way, affects other people far outside my realm of influence, and probably, honestly, a little bit more than it does for most people, because a lot of people listen to me for good or ill. I hope for good. I don't know. I hope I do more good than bad in the world. That's my aim. But I am acutely aware of the history of the United States just sort of stomping into other countries and telling them what to do and destroying their governments. Again, very against my personal value of self-determination. So I'm aware that, like, as an American, there's that baggage that I'm, like, I'm not doing it directly. I don't support it, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't affected me and that my position in the world isn't different because it happened, So I try to be particularly sensitive about that and try to come from a place of trying to learn more and knowing at least the outlines of the shape of my ignorance, which is great. There's so many things I don't know, which, thank God, right? Can you imagine knowing everything? Yikes. Yeah. So article about Timnit Gebru and discussing artificial intelligence in Africa. So I'll post this for you. And if you're not familiar, Timnit is from Ethiopia. Bye, Corky. Thanks for joining. Yes, absolutely. Brett says she's not anti-AI, but anti-bad ML. Yeah, definitely. Oh, I didn't even notice Corky. It's fine. Yes, and I think the main point in this article, which I recommend you read, I posted it in the chat, is that, just like Karen Howe's series on colonialism and AI, it's reinforcing existing power structures. It's moving agency away from individuals, and particularly people who have in the past had their agency removed, and it's just perpetuating those problems, and it's perpetuating those inequities, and it's enhancing them, and that's an issue, right? So like I've talked about this before, I'm a huge fan of projects, particularly language projects that are people working on their own language or their community languages and building things that are immediately applicable to their situation. And I'm much less big of a fan of projects that are people from other wealthier, how'd they get that wealth? Other wealthier countries coming in and being like, we're building the language technology for you, you're so welcome, and oh, by the way, we own it and we're the ones profiting from it. So yeah, again, self-determination. George says it would be better if the live streams were promoted via LinkedIn. Might be more suitable audience than Twitter. That is a good point. I have not been putting them on LinkedIn. I will add it to my to-do list. I forget that LinkedIn exists. I'm going to be honest. Good point. Thank you. Okay. So, yes, good article. I recommend you read it. Timnit's got a lot to say. She's also, I don't know if I mentioned this, she's from Ethiopia, even though she's currently living in the US, so has certainly has a perspective which considers Africa. Let me just scooch this down. Scooch. All right. And this is, again, systems that people are building that are genuinely misleading. This one about, Brett says, I don't do LinkedIn, but that's just me. Yeah, it's a useful way for me to keep up with like former colleagues, and that's about how useful it is for me. There's a lot of stuff on there that I just don't find particularly useful personally, but I know a lot of people really like it. So anyway, opinion piece about, you know, how more surveillance is not going to fix the problems of school shootings. If, I don't know, again, a very US problem, to which I think there's a pretty clear solution that we're never going to do. So, but yes, so the basic idea of this is that there are lots of people who will, you know, happily sell you, you know, surveillance systems that are extremely expensive, and they're like, oh, you know, we'll send the cops in, we'll save the kids, everybody will be safer, which just seems, on its face, I see how you could find that appealing, but this is normalizing wide-scale surveillance in a way that children can't opt out of, right? So again, reduces self-determination, because in the US, you are legally required to go to school, with some exceptions. It's very difficult for a child to choose not to go to school, basically. And these are biometric surveillance systems, so the information collected about children at school, which they can't opt out of, will follow them throughout, you know, their adult lives, whether they want it or not. And also, here's a fun fact about the US legal system. The police are not actually required to obey the law and are not actually required to protect people. They have no legal requirement to protect people. So if you are familiar with one of the recent school shootings, the police not only did not stop him, but they prevented other people from going in to try and save their kids. So extremely upsetting. Yeah, and adding additional surveillance is not gonna fix the problem. It's just going to allow more situations for abuse to occur. Anyway, in lighter news, I guess. Let me make this a little bit smaller so I can see. Brett says, or tell the truth. Yes, or inform you of your Miranda rights, thanks to a recent Supreme Court case. So that's cool. Yeah, There's a lot to say about police in the US. Little of it good. So this is sort of like a puff piece in Scientific American, which is like a popular press for science. And basically they did some prompt engineering to try and get GPT-3 to write a paper about itself, and then they tried to publish it. And I don't think they succeeded. But I would say that this borders on academic misconduct. And I know that was not the intention of the authors, right? They're like, oh, this is a cool thought experiment. I wouldn't have done this. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it will be valuable or useful. And they even said in the paper, it's in the discussion itself, they're like, well, it said some things that were incorrect, or, referenced academic theories that are no longer hold up. But, it's just, it's the machine doing that, so it's fine. So yeah, shouldn't be doing this. There's enough fake academic writing out there as it is, and enough misleading journals that I don't think we should be automatically adding anything to the pile. But that's me. And then, yeah, so I mentioned that, academics are not super well paid. It's not just the US. So this is a news story from The Guardian, which I believe is a UK newspaper, but this is the US edition, on University College Union at Leeds, and how the university staff can't afford food. They are not paid a living wage. They can't afford to eat. Granted, prices in the UK right now are very high and rising quickly. So it's a particularly acute issue, but even before, the amount of precarity was very, very high. So yes, academics are not paid well. They are particularly not paid well in the UK. It's kind of an issue, and it's I don't know what the future of the field is going to be like unless we start paying academics more, and I feel like that's probably not going to happen there's this whole movement in university administration to start running them like businesses, basically. And as it turns out, people are expensive. And so not paying people is a great way to cut costs, which is good because universities are for making money, and that's their primary use in society. I'm being facetious, they are not. And it is wild to me to try and run a university for profit, particularly one that is funded by taxpayer dollars, but there you go. George says, GPT works as far as the current format for papers is used. Once changed, it will not work, right? Yeah, I don't know. They didn't actually share the paper itself, I don't believe. Let me double check. Just looking for the links. Discussion of this ascension being. Yeah, they've put it on a preprint server, the French preprint server HAL, which I've never heard about, and definitely that's not archive. Yeah, so they'll find out. Yeah, I think you'd have to go and check on HAL. I don't know, but I mean, like, an academic paper is not just the format of the paper, right? An academic paper is a synthesis of knowledge and the generation of new knowledge, and GPT-3 can't do that. No language model can, and it's wild to believe that they could. But yes, I think you could get the form of an academic paper, right? It's like, I don't mean this in a cruel way, but a lot of times when you're grading student papers, you can see that they've read academic papers and they've seen the structure of academic papers, but they're not quite there yet on having, particularly undergraduates, right? It's just like, it takes time to learn how to do academic writing, and it will have sort of like the paragraph structure, but like the information in the paragraphs isn't organized in a particularly compelling way, right? Or they'll have like a bunch of citations, but then if you've read the papers and you like, some of those citations don't actually support that point, right? You just put those in there. And like, as they get better and better at writing research papers, they stop doing that and they start writing, you know, more and more cohesive arguments and having a better understanding of the literature. And, you know, the form may look very similar, but the quality of the work improves. I think there's, if you have not done research, it's really easy to conflate the appearance of research with the research itself, if that makes sense. And it's one of those things where you just need a lot of context. You need a lot of context to look at an academic paper and figure out its quality. And that's why it's a specialized career field. Yeah, and I can think of perhaps some YouTubers who have made that same student mistake of confusing the form with the content of the paper. All right. And this one, so we talked a lot about social media and moderation, and sort of like bad actors. I don't know. There's technology, because, you know, computers and particularly automated systems are force multipliers and they make it easier to do things faster and at a greater scale. They're a very powerful tool for authoritarians. And this is an example of how a company used social media to mislead people in order to discredit labor organizers, basically. So I'm not super familiar with this particular what is it called? iFood? Yeah, iFood. I'm not super familiar with this particular delivery app, but basically the workers were extremely displeased with their experience. It paid very poorly. The treatment of the workers was poor. And so they created, to sort of retaliate against the labor organizing, a bunch of like fake pages that looked like they were by regular employees, but were actually by a marketing agency to try and, you know, mislead employees and like tamp down dissent and make the labor organizers' job harder. One thing that really stuck out at me is, you know, their sort of use of memes and the form, again, of the, the form of the, you know, social media discourse, but with, you know, nefarious, I would say, purposes. So like this is a PowerPoint where they're planning all the memes they're going to do on their anti-union page, which is, yeah, interesting. Brett says, the insight generated is not valid. It's like a poem generator, so don't make good poems. Yeah, definitely. Making a painting in the style of Jackson Pollock will not mean it has the same value as a Jackson Pollock. Yep. Absolutely. And that doesn't mean that like you can't see it as valuable and you can't relate to it and it might not have value to you, right? Like if a poem is like a bad poem, but you still enjoy reading and it brings you joy, that doesn't mean that it's bad inherently. It's just not the same, right? George says, off topic a little bit, but I have the feeling you'd be a great element in Free Code Camp. It would also help promote the channel. Oh yeah, I should reach out to them. I do like, it's Quincy, right? That runs Free Code Camp. I think we've talked a couple times. He seems like a cool person. 1, 2, 3. I'll add it to my to-dos. Anyway, so again, just like an example of, I actually should probably put this with the other data poisoning examples, right? Because this looks like user-generated data. This looks like real, you know, real organic interactions, but they are not. They are just being made to look like that. And as far as I know, it was all done by hand, right? This wasn't automated, but it's something you could automate. And if you were training systems on Facebook data, you're going to have this data in here, which I think is not a good representation of actual user data. Brett says front-end masters would be a space to try for. Oh, I'm so bad at front-end. I will look into them. My husband's a front-end developer, and like every time I go in and I just like, we're chatting and he's talking about like button pixels, I just like, oh, I do not have the attention to detail for it. I'll tell you that for free. Anyway. Back to more language technology. So I sort of hinted at this a little bit. So this is a blog post by Angus Andrea Grieve-Smith, who is a linguist, and gender fluid. And I think this is a really interesting piece on gender expression in the voice. So something that you'll see a lot in language technology, and I'll post this if you want to read it, is the idea of detecting gender via voice. And I would say that don't do that, right? The way to detect gender is that you ask people their gender, and that is the only valid way to do it. And also, you probably don't need it, right? Like whatever it is that you think you need gender for, probably actually you don't, has been my experience in sort of engineering systems. And it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction that like, oh, gender's a variable, it'll be easy to measure, I should just add it in here and see if it works. And particularly given, you know, increasing persecution. Sorry, I kept trying to find the word and my brain was like subjugation. I was like, that's not the word. Increasing persecution of trans folks in the US. Having that information opens your users up to potential harm. So I would just not do it. And B, this is a really good discussion of why that might be particularly difficult. So Angus Andrea is gender fluid. Sometimes he presents as male, sometimes she presents as female. The vocal expression changes, you know, they are a linguist and like a very accomplished vocalist, apparently. I'm not really a singer, but he's done a lot of voice training. And so any sort of gender label you apply to the voice may be, you know, fairly accurate at that point in time, but won't be correct for that individual, right? So, yeah, I think it's important to really think about why we do things and think about edge cases. And I think this is a great example of why gender expression in the voice is not, you know, cut or dried. We got a male bin, we got a female bin, we're just going to sort them. It'll be super easy. I would advise that you not do that. And this is a good example of an edge case that, you know, I would say is probably not all that uncommon, but you may not have thought about before, right? Like you may not know a lot of gender fluid people. So, and you may not have, you know, heard about how that affects the way that they use language. So cool blog post. I recommend reading it. I posted the link in chat. Andre says, I came here for the O'Reilly live sessions with Rachel. Oh, thank you. All right, speaking of prosecution, so this is just more of a statement about how legislation can hurt people. We talked a little bit about, you know, abortion. We talked a lot about abortion rights in the United States last week is when that was. And this was just sort of a lot of examples in this article of how because the legislation is not clear, practitioners don't really know what to do and end up making decisions that harm patients, right? So one example is this discussed in more detail in this article. So ectopic pregnancies are when a fertilized egg implants in the fallopian tube, and it is impossible for that to come to term, right? It will just kill you. So if someone has an ectopic pregnancy, the only way to save that person's life is to operate, basically. And because of the way that the anti-abortion laws are written, a lot of them, it's putting doctors in a lot of legal jeopardy if they do that, right? If they do, again, the only thing they can do to save that patient's life. So yeah, I think it has a lot of parallels with legislation in other areas, and I think it's good to think about. And I think it's right. Obviously, like whether or not to perform an operation is something that is decided by a human. But if you're using that as training data to automate it, don't automate it. Do not do that. But if you were, right, this would begin to affect your training data. And the world is changing around us, and our systems don't always change with it. Anyway. And now we have a couple examples of, apparently that is that person's Twitter handle. Now we have an example. So I believe this tweet was deleted, but has been retweeted a lot. So this person has a Tesla, and apparently in Teslas, you can put the car in theater mode, right? So you can like watch something while you're driving, which is buck wild to me that anyone thought that that was a good idea, but you can do it. And once they did this, their car froze and they can't get out of theater mode. And as a result, they can't use their car. So yeah, this is an engineering error, which is a software error, it looks like, which has made the car unusable. And this is sort of like, obviously not a great time for this person, but sort of like kind of funny because, you know, their car is broken for a software issue, which I do find kind of funny. I'm sorry, I know this ruined their day probably. But beyond that, making software and UI design choices in the context of cars has really big ramifications on safety, right? So this article goes into a lot more depth about the ways in which systems that, you know, are integrated into cars because they're cool and because they look nice, end up having really negative effects down the line, right? And the reason that I wanted to talk about this today is, I've mentioned this before, that we don't have, as software engineers, legally, we don't have a duty of care in the same way that automotive engineers do towards our users. And as software is incorporated into more and more things, I think, personally, I think we should, right? I think we should have like a direct duty of care towards people who use our systems and use the things that we've built. It's that software is eating the world, right? And we're putting it in everything, and yet we are not being held as developers to the same, you know, ethical and moral standards as people who are building the systems that we're putting the software into. And it's our decisions that are making the issues, right? I'm not saying like software development, it's the only thing that's changing anything in the world. No, of course not. But there is a lot of room for harm. And I feel like when we build these systems, we are taking on the responsibility to some degree for the harm that happens because of them. So yeah. And if I'm being perfectly frank, sort of like putting on my Nostradamus hat and looking into the future, it's kind of hard for me to see a situation in which the duty of care is not put onto individual practitioners, because there's no way that companies are going to accept that degree of liability without like sustained legislative pressure. And it's going to have to be legislative pressure that's great enough to get around the extremely highly paid lobbyists, right? Tech companies spend a lot of money on lobbying. So yeah. We will see, but I would, personally as a professional, really think about that future when you are building things and consider, how can you be a little bit more cautious? How can you be a little bit more mindful? How can you be a little bit more thoughtful? And how can you proactively protect users because it's the right thing to do, but also because, potentially, eventually it could be your fault. Brett says, bricked the car. Yeah, so manual driving options are not options in Tesla. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I think that in this case, they just couldn't. AI software is eating the world, yeah. Hi, Luke. Welcome. Good to see you. Yeah, the car won't drive if the Meteor player is active. That's my understanding. George says, isn't there an institution to perform safety tests or even remotely basic quality tests for tech products? I mean, in Germany, top engineers in VW were put in prison for cheating on the emissions test in 2017. No, I don't think so. Not yet. We might get it at some point, but yeah, my impression is that Germany has much more consumer protection than the US does. The US has much more consumer protection than places like China. So yeah, no, I don't think so. Potentially the FCC, but I mean, there's also one of the Supreme Court cases last week was that federal agencies only have powers that are directly legislated to them by Congress now as a result of the Supreme Court case decision regarding the EPA, which obviously affects how much the environment can be protected at a federal level without direct legislation from Congress. But I think that also means that in general, federal agencies are going to have less power to enforce the things that they're supposed to be able to enforce. So I'm not going to expect more consumer protection in the future, right? At least from a federal level. And we might get it from the states, but then it's going to be very patchwork, right? Like even just looking at the, this one? Nope. This one? Nope. Yes, even just looking at this, right? Speaking of patchwork laws in the US, you're only required to provide salary bands for Colorado, right? Like no other US state requires that. So in this case, it's helpful because you can still see the information if you don't live in Colorado. But yeah, I think the US legislative landscape is going to become a lot more patchwork. And I think we're also probably going to see a lot more people complying more than they have to, like with this one, right? So people, like there was a pharmacist in Virginia who didn't fulfill a prescription for something that is perfectly legal in Virginia because that medication could potentially, lead to miscarriage. There was no legal requirement for them to do that. They chose to do it out of their own free will. But you may see a situation where one company is like, whatever the most restrictive law is, follows that. Or not, who knows? I don't know, man. Yeah. Ashu says, write better test cases. Absolutely. That would make a great tattoo. Good overall. George says, Ralph Nader comes to mind now. Andre says, reminds me of the theme song Down in the Park from Gary Newman. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that. So anyway, just, be a cautious engineer, which I think most engineers are and want to be and wants to do a good job and help people. That's my sincerely held belief. Goodbye. We're leaving. All right, if you are in Canada, the Vector Institute has a AI and Bias in AI program July 12th and 26th, so that's coming up, to help provide more information about that in Canada. I will say one thing that makes me a little bit about this description here is during this program, participants will learn and apply the latest approaches for addressing bias in AI, which is good, right? Important skill to have. We need to be able to evaluate systems. But I noticed that they didn't talk about how to choose not to deploy systems, which to my mind is the most impactful thing you can do, is to choose not to automate something where the automation would increase harm. So I haven't been to it. Maybe they will discuss that in depth. I hope so. Maybe not. We'll see. If any of y'all go, let me know. Luke says, I think I'll keep taking the bus. Yeah, buses are great. Big fan of buses. Ooh, they just added a new long distance commuter bus in Virginia that's run by the Department of Transportation, which is fabulous. Doesn't go from Charlottesville to Richmond, though, which would have been great. I would love to have had a bus from Charlottesville to Richmond, but well. And I got two more. This one's a little bit of a bummer. If you're not familiar with stalkerware, it is a class of software where the aim is to provide someone who is not the user information about the user more generally. So a great example of stalkerware sort of in the hardware department is Apple AirTags, which have been used kind of a lot recently to track people, right? So someone will put an Apple AirTag on somebody else. That second person won't realize it, and they'll find out where they live. I was seeing actually somebody reported that it happened to their family at Disneyland this week. That one was, they were tracked using an Apple AirTag. So the thing about abortion bans is that the stalkerware is now going to give, stalkers and abusers another vector of harm for their victims, because, if you can, even if someone didn't have an abortion, right? I don't know if y'all are familiar with swatting. Basically, it's the idea that you maliciously report, a crime at the location of someone who you want to hurt, and if the crime is of a type where they send in a SWAT team, their house is broken into, they're traumatized, American policing being what it is, hopefully they survive the experience. But so even if someone has not had an abortion, if you can, maliciously report them, even if that's not the case, that could cause, quite a bit of harm to individuals. So, yep. Don't build it. Don't build it. Don't use it. Let other people know to watch out for it, and know that the danger is now greater. Yep. Andre says, do you read a scientific or fantastic book about the AI ethics problem? Oh, like one I'd recommend? Sorry, I'm just double checking the author on this. Yeah, so I would say Automating Inequality is a good one, and that is by Virginia Eubanks. I'll just pop it in here. So this is a really good, discussion of surveillance state, policing, the ways in which systems can not just reflect but increase inequality, and then weapons of mass destruction that I believe is by Kathy Miller. Kathy O'Neill is another book that I would recommend. She is a mathematician. And it talks about sort of the societal impacts of algorithms. So this is specifically, in automating processes, not necessarily deep learning specifically. But yeah, those are two that I would recommend. Brett says, boo, AirTags. Yeah. Robbie says the name's also Danger Stalker. Okay, so maybe another program to watch out for. Yep. Saw the Disney story too. They were tracked after a night event. They got an alert that a tracker was following them. Androids need an app installed to pick them up, unlike iPhone. Yeah, so there are safety things built in if you're an Apple user. And if you're not an Apple user, you have to download an app by Apple to be able to know if someone has planted an AirTag on you. But yeah, you know, I have a lot of friends and acquaintances that have been stalked and harassed, and it's scary. It's really scary. It really changes your life, and is a bad time. All right. And this is the last one before we get to something a little bit more fun. So you might have seen that recently Microsoft stopped offering facial detection, they still do, facial recognition, so like labeling individuals. But both Microsoft and Google continue to use emotion detection AI. So we've talked about this before. Emotion detection isn't something that you can really do. And they claim that it's for like, oh, it's for accessibility. Which I'm not going to say it does not increase. It doesn't. I don't want to say that emotion recognition as a technology has never increased accessibility for anyone. I am going to say that it is a deeply flawed technology that almost never works, and claims to do something that you can't do. Right? People are not clear with their faces about their internal emotional state all the time, right? That's a ridiculous thing to claim, and also pretty ableist, right? So are you claiming, you know, that if someone has a facial disfigurement, if emotion detection is a thing that you can do, right, and that you can do for everybody, then it would follow that if you could not detect someone's emotion, they didn't have it, right? So if someone had, you know, a disfigurement, well, clearly they're not feeling emotions anymore. Like, I don't think anyone would say that, but it's a pretty clear corollary, right? It's a bit of a straw man, I will admit, but I think it helps show how, you know, how flawed the idea of the system is to begin with, right? It's like sentiment analysis, right? The usages are very limited. And I just wouldn't use them. I wouldn't use them. I wouldn't build them. I wouldn't recommend them. I wish Microsoft and Google would take them down, but they haven't. Anyway, story about that. Hi, Chris. Welcome. Brett says, such a subjective problem due to human nature. Resting happy face. Yeah, absolutely. Great example here is I'm an American. If I'm out and about and I see someone on the street, like, I will smile at them. That is normal in the United States. In Europe, that is a buck wild thing to do, and people would not do it, right? Like, I think in Germany, if you just like sort of go around smiling at every stranger you meet, people will think that you are odd at best. So there's a strong cultural component about like what you express with your face, and of course, like, different faces are different. And yeah, I wouldn't do it. Don't think it's good. Don't think it's that useful, and has lots of potential problems. Brett says, some cats look grumpy and some look happy based on the fur. Yeah, absolutely. Brett says, nothing is impossible. I mean, the greatest emotion detection system of all is asking people how they feel and having a trusting relationship with them, so that they know that it is safe to be truthful with you. Yep. Yep. Brett says, lol at German smiles. Yeah, it is. I've been to Germany a couple times, and it is hard to be a Southerner there. They do not act in my culturally appropriate ways. Oh. All right, and I have a couple fun things. A little treat, a little reward at the end. I think we could all use it. Luke says, it's more common for that kind of friendliness in the north of England where I'm from, not as much in the south of England, at least according to stereotypes. Yeah, my sort of personal litmus test is that the south of England is like the north of the US, and that the north of England is like the south of the US, right? Like poorer, minoritized, lots of negative stereotypes, maybe a little bit more friendly. Yeah, that's my sort of personal relationship that I make there. Also, a lot of people in the south of the US came from the north of England, historically, familially line, or even further north to the north of England, like, say, Scotland. A lot of people were just removed and sent over here. Yup. Anyway, Alexei said, wouldn't be so one-sided on the software, which helps track people. It helps a lot with OSINT work. The problem is to make it ethical and safe. OSINT. OSINT. I'm gonna look up that acronym. Open source intelligence, the collection and analysis of data gathered from open sources, overt and publicly available sources to produce actionable intelligence. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I have a strong value of self-determination, and I feel like if people's information is being used, they should know about it. And I think, like, if I am opting in to location tracking to help, produce better traffic data, perfectly fine. I don't see an issue with that. If I am not choosing to do it, that's an issue, right? Anyway, that's my stance on it, and I am, I really value people having control over themselves and their data at an individual level. Robbie says, sentiment is also related to ethical words. Why do people care about ethical AI like computer vision then? Yeah, I mean, I think there are pretty limited uses of computer vision that I am on board with. Let me put it that way. I've talked about this a lot. And I mean, honestly, there are also limited uses of natural language processing and speech technology that I'm on board with. Like, I think a lot of the things that we could do, or a lot of the things we convince people that we could do, we shouldn't be doing. And that's my stance on it. I think I'm pretty clear about that. All right. I think this was just a fun example of GPT-3's sort of propensity to give both sides answers, right? Like, there's a lot of data in the GPT training data that's like, on the one hand, on the other hand. And this is a great example of it that I think is, well, this person thought was pretty funny, and I'm inclined to agree with. This is by Peter Wildford on Twitter. So the question is, and this is the prompt, what makes for a more productive company? Having everyone in one open office on land, or everyone be in a tiny box at the bottom of the ocean? Pretty clear, you would want people to be on one open office on land and not in the tiny box at the bottom of the ocean, not least because people can't live there. And the answer from GPT-3 is, there's no definitive answer to this question. There is, as each option has its own advantages and disadvantages. Having everyone in one open office on land may promote collaboration and communication among employees, while having everyone in a tiny box at the bottom of the ocean may promote concentration and focus. Here's one way of putting it. Ultimately, it is up to the individual company to decide what works best for them. So I think as, this feels very much like sort of Business Insider-y type of article, and just struck me as funny. And then the last thing, so I know I am, I know I talk a lot about sort of like the use of language technology I don't like, but I think games are a fun thing, and games are good, and things that bring people happiness are fine, right? Does not really bother me. So here is a by Nicholas Agudelo, and I will Nicolas. I might be saying that wrong, and I apologize if so. I'll just put this link if you wanted to check it out. And it's a text-based RPG game, so sort of like what is it, Zorg? Zoink? Zorg? It's Zorg, right? That's what I'm thinking of. Y'all are gonna have to help me out. The you're eaten by a Gru, right? Like that one, the like really the really early text-based RPG. Zork, that's it. Zork. Wow, I was very close. Z-O-R-K. Yes, Brett said Zork. Thank you, thank you, thank you. George says, so that answer is the result of a poor data set? No, I don't think necessarily. I think the data set was like correct, and that's a good form, right? That's like, that is, the form of that looks like what you'd expect a discussion in a business, advice article to be, right? The issue is the grounding, right? Like, it's nonsensical, it doesn't make sense. And it's not even an issue because it's a language model. You don't expect it to make sense. It's not supposed to be grounded. It's, a link in a chain, and to remove all the other links from the chain and be like, here, a chain is a weird thing to do. It's because it's a limitation of the technology itself that it isn't grounded, and you would need to build other things around it to get something more useful, if that makes sense. Yeah. Brett says, yeah, Zark. Early 80s play in computer lab in high school. Yeah. Chris says, I think I played this or something similar. Amazing how it has a long-term memory. Yeah. And Alexei says, Bellingcat was able to track the perpetrators of the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. If the governments and corporations are spying on us, it could be beneficial to spy on them back. The era of transparency. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between private citizens doing something and nation states doing something, right? Yeah. I don't know. Police surveillance, I'm an American. I'm from the South. Police surveillance isn't going to affect everybody the same, right? It's going to hurt some people more, and it's going to be people that are already disadvantaged. Oh, sorry. We were talking about this. On to fun stuff. The code, I'm pretty sure, is on GitHub. Yes. And I'm pretty sure this is actually a completely rule-based system. Yeah, completely rule-based system, which I think is fun and also makes a lot of sense. It also makes a lot of sense from a gameplay perspective, right? Because you do want to keep track of things. You want to make sure that the behavior is consistent. If you're familiar with GPT Dungeon, which is sort of a similar type of game, but used during GPT-3, you can't keep track of stats and things in that system, whereas in this one, you can. So I think just a fun little example of a language product, language technology project, completely rule-based. Obviously, a lot of work went into it. Yeah, and if you like text-based RPGs, maybe a cool thing to check out. Yeah, so I posted the link in there if you wanna check it out. Yeah. Robbie says RPG game is a computer game. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I just used an acronym without defining it. So it's a role-playing game. So if you'll remember, if you watched the stream last Wednesday, we were doing what's called a TTRPG, a tabletop role-playing game where it was actually on a computer, but basically we're a bunch of people sitting around doing things. And computer role-playing games, usually you're playing a role in an environment where everything is controlled by a computer, as opposed to playing a role in an environment where everything is controlled by other people, which is the TTRPG. So yeah, fun thing to check out. All right, and that is everything I had for my supporters. Did I not put a button up? I guess I didn't. I'm gonna need to put a button on my box so I can get to that, thankfully. But to my supporters, thank you. I appreciate you. And I haven't put up the links for today's stream yet. It'll go out later today. It takes me a while. For those of you who aren't supporters on Coffee, every Wednesday, you'll get a post with a link with all of the links that I talk about, but I also have a little bit of a description of what's in each link, and they're all organized and tagged and stuff. So it takes me a while to put them together, especially when there's 80 of them. But that'll be going out today. So thank you for supporting me. I really appreciate it. And it makes it possible to keep doing what I'm doing. Hopefully into the future. We'll see how it goes. So thank you so much for joining today, everybody. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned a lot. And we will be talking about other stuff on next Thursday. I'm doing a great job selling my streams. So on Tuesday, we'll have a deep dive, which I know I promised how to have ideas for research and projects, and I might do that. Or something else that I've been thinking about doing is a code review of the worst code I've ever written, because I have written some stinkers, and that's something else that I'm like, oh, maybe that could be kind of fun. So I'll do something, I'll announce it ahead of time. It'll be 10 a.m. next Tuesday, and then 10 a.m. next Thursday. This time, we'll be back doing this for the next coffee chat, where again, I will have way too much to talk about and I will get close to losing my voice again. It's struggling. I don't know if you can tell. So, oh, Luke, thank you, Luke, for the support. Luke just supported me on coffee and I really appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you on Tuesday. Bye.